Hi everyone, I'm Joe Brady and welcome to the second in our series of seminars on controlling light. Today's subject is getting great environmental portraits by mixing flash with available light. Now when you signed in, you may have noticed that you can chat with us during the presentation. I'll be monitoring your questions and I'll do my best to answer everything we can in the time allotted. And one other thing, as you probably just saw, this is live streaming video and sometimes it can require a bit more bandwidth than everyone has available. If you find the video starting to fail, lose sound, or find that the broadcast is getting too choppy, there's unfortunately nothing we can do about it at this end to increase your bandwidth. So if this does happen to you, I just want to let you know that it is being recorded. So if you have to leave early or for some reason you lose the signal, it'll be available for download later for you. So let's get started because we have a lot to discuss. I want you to become the master of your lighting, and to do that there are a few simple tools you need to help make this happen. I'm going to show you how to get great results by using a single off-camera flash, a light meter, a light stand, and a pair of wireless triggers, and if you have some duct tape around you can use that too. That's really optional. The part of this that may be foreign to you, however, is how we're going to set up the flash. Since this entire series is about taking control of light, we're going to do that here by putting the flash on full manual. If you've never done this before, you might be surprised at how easy it is to use and how much consistency and control you're going to have. I've seen so many people afraid of using flash outdoors because they simply don't have control of it. Putting your flash on manual gives you the ultimate of control, and you'll see how easy it is to do. Now, to get your flash in manual on both Canon and Nikon flashes, it's very simple. Just hit the mode button until the display shows M. So here we see the back of a Canon flash. This is a 580EX2. And when you hit the mode button, you get the letter M, and you see some numbers after it, in this case 1/8, which means that the flash is set for use 1/8 of its power. Same thing goes for Nikon. It works exactly the same way. With your flash on manual, it always puts out the exact same amount of light, and that's what's going to allow us to get consistent results. Now, one last thing to do before going on location. Let's set up the light meter. Today I'm using a Sekonic 358 because it's got some special features that we're going to take advantage of. But out of the box, this meter does come set to read in 1/10 of a stop increments. Now, this is great for studio lighting because it's very precise. But out in the field, it can be kind of confusing if you see numbers that don't match up to the display on your camera. So what we're going to do is set the meter to read in 1/3 stop increments. And to do that, it's very simple. Just flip open the back cover. I'll have Rick kind of zoom in here, and you can see the back of the meter. So this little square here is a wireless transmitter, which we're going to use to fire our lights. And then right next to this is a set of dip switches. So let's take a look at the dip switch diagram. It'll show it a little bit better. So here you see, if you want to set the flash to 1/3 stop increments, just make sure that the dip switches 3 and 4 are set in the up position, and that will take care of that. Now, your meter will give you readings that match the display in your camera. That makes things a lot simpler to follow. Now, since our meter also has the optional wireless trigger module installed, when you rotate the wheel on the meter, you have a new mode, and it's a lightning bolt with a T next to it. Now, when you first get there, you'll see a number flashing. Let me go ahead and rotate around. Let's see if Rick can zoom in on this. So I'll hit the mode button, and as I spin around and get to the one with the T, you see a flashing number 1. That's the channel that I have my Pocket Wizard set to. So I just hold mode down, give it one click of a turn, and now my Pocket Wizards are set to channel 1. And the beauty of that is when I want to meter my lights, I have my Pocket Wizard on a stand, set on channel 1. My flash is on manual, and what I can do is just fire my flash directly from the meter. Very handy. Because it leaves you to concentrate on what you're doing and not have to worry about running back and forth to the flash. Now, since today's subject is environmental portraits, and we don't yet have the capability to actually broadcast live from the field, we filmed our shooting sessions earlier. Take a look at this first clip, and then when we come back, I'll take some questions. Okay. So here we are in Harriman State Park, beautiful lake behind us. We have some sun behind clouds coming in and out. We've got some trees casting shadows, and this is a real pretty place, but maybe a difficult place to shoot a portrait. So in order to get the light under control and really see what's going on, what we're using today is a Sekonic 358. And the reason I like this meter for this kind of shooting is that it will not only measure the ambient light, it will allow us to fire flash because we're going to need to use some fill flash, and it will also tell us the percentage of ambient light to flash that we're using, because if that number gets too much flash versus ambient, then it's going to look very flashy, and we don't want flash looking photos, we want them to look natural. So we can get that under control and see those numbers right here on the meter. So what I've brought today, kind of as my fill flash, is just a Canon speed light mounted on top of a Kupo C-stand. And the reason I'm using a C-stand today rather than just a regular camera light stand is they are much heavier. And it's a little bit breezy, and I don't want to have to worry about this falling over. These are heavy stands and they're really nice. Plus the way the legs are built, it makes it really easy to sandbag them if you've got a lot of people around. Also, I'm using a Pocket Wizard transmitter here connected to my flash so I can keep the flash off the camera. And on top of that, I've got this great little accessory called the Pocket Wizard Caddy that my friend Brian got me, and this allows me to mount the Pocket Wizard to pretty much anything. I can put it on the flash, I can put it on any light stand, and it just keeps everything snug and in place. Now the reason I'm using the Pocket Wizard is because the Sekonic 358 has the option to have a transmitter put inside it, which I can open back here. You can see this little square there, that's the transmitter. Okay, it's very handy to have. I can actually just push the button on the meter and the flash fires. I don't know if that shows up on video or not, but we'll see. So what we're going to do is measure the ambient light. We're going to measure what's going on back there. We're going to put our subject, our model Jess here, right on the edge of these stones, and we're going to see what the difference is so that we can then even the light here versus there. And to show you an example, we're going to take a shot with the metering value we have for the lake behind us, and then one for Jess herself, and we're going to see that neither of them are going to work. If we meter for the background, she's going to be in shadow because of the trees here. If we meter for her, it's going to blow out the background. So we need to bring in some light to fix that, and that's what this is going to allow us to calculate. Alright, so the first thing I need to do before we start our shoot is I need to white balance for the scene, because we have Jess here in the shadow. This is Jess. Say hi, Jess.
Hi.
We have Jess in shadow, we've got back there. We've got kind of two different lighting conditions, but the subject is most important in this, so I need to white balance for this. Now, I also want to do a shot of the color checker passport, which is the other side. I want to do this so I can have a camera profile for later, and to make sure these work, I really have to meter the scene. So first, I'm just going to take an ambient light meter reading right off the test with a white card. And we're shooting at 100 ISO today at 125th of a second. So the meter gives me a value of 4.8, which is about a third of a stop down from 5.6. So I'm going to set my camera on manual, and we're going to shoot the right f-stop. Alright, so I've got my camera set. Okay. Alright, so now when you're doing a custom white balance, it varies from camera to camera. On the Canon system that I'm using a 7D, you take a picture of the target first, and then you tell the menu system that you want to actually create a custom white balance from that. So then after I've got my white balance set, now it's time to shoot the color checker target, because I'll need that for my profile later. And good, I've got a good shot of my target, so now I have a white balance set, I've got the color checker, now it's time to measure what's going on with the lights. Is being loud. Okay, a couple quick questions that came through, so let's get those answered first. One of the questions was, is this wireless capability something peculiar just to the Sekonic 358? It starts with the 358. The next step up is the Sekonic 758, which is the top of the line, and that has those same capabilities. As far as pricing goes, a couple of you asked about pricing with the meter and the Pocket Wizards. After our next video break, I'll get that information for you as well. Now, someone else asked, well, how are you getting the flash to fire from the camera? Well, I've got a Pocket Wizard connected to the flash on channel 1, and that's allowing me to fire it with my meter, as you see there. I'm not sure if you guys actually see the video, the flash actually happen on the video, but same thing with the camera. I have a Pocket Wizard on top of my camera. It's also set for channel 1, so I simply point and shoot, and my flash is putting out manual. And if I take my meter reading, put that in my camera on manual, it's a perfect exposure every time. It's a beautiful thing. Any other questions, Sarah? All right, we'll get back to them. Let's continue on. All right, so we've seen the environment, we've seen the light situation that was needed to be dealt with. By the way, dappled shade, where you've got some kind of sun and shade coming through at the same time, is really difficult to deal with. I highly recommend you get your subject out of dappled light, because if not, you're going to have to put some kind of flag over top of them to block that. Also, as we see some more examples, take notice of the effect of different percentages of flash to ambient light. When the flash contribution starts becoming more than 50%, it starts to become really obvious that there's a lot of flash being used. Now, this may not be a problem, may be okay, but it depends on your goals and the look that you're going for. Now, one other thing to take note of, you've probably already seen this, video has much less tonal range than our cameras do. When you encounter a really contrasty situation like we had out there in the lake, you can see it's unless you have a whole lot of supplemental lights, it's pretty impossible to light a foreground and a background at the same time. I just point that out so that when you're comparing the actual still shots compared to what you see in the recorded video, you can see that's why there's a difference. So let's go back to the park and take some shots. All right, so I need to see what's going on here first before I evaluate how we're going to light this. Now, I've got a bright background. Now, rather than walking all the way over there and taking a light meter reading, I'm going to take the lazy way out. I'm just going to use the camera for this. So I'm going to frame way back there. I just want to get a reading. All right, so the camera tells me the correct exposure for back there is f8. That's good. So we'll use that as our background exposure. So that's the number we're going to be going for. I can't do anything about that. I can't make it darker. I can't make it lighter. It is what it is. So what I need to do is make the light here closer to there so that can happen. So what I need to do is take an ambient light meter reading here of the light falling on Jess. And I get f4 at 125th of a second. So I've got f4 to f8, which is 2 stops difference. That means I have to add enough light to bring this up to f8. Now, we talked about adding f-stops before. That's actually a fair amount of light we need to add. Preferably, I'd rather have it just be 1 stop difference, 5, 6 or so, and that might happen in a little bit, but the sun just went behind the clouds. So let's take another reading. It's still f4, but the background's darkened up. So this is the part you kind of have to move quickly on. And now we're down to about 6.3, so that's actually good. We've lost from f8 to 6.3, we've lost 2/3 of a stop. So that's narrowed the gap a little bit. I'm going to need to add much less light. All right, I'm still at f4, so that's been pretty continuous here. I need to add enough light to bring it up to, remember the number there? 6.3. I need to add, so 4 to 5, 6 is 1 stop, and then 5, 6 to 6.3 is another 1/3. So I need to add another 1 1/3 stops of light. Now, how do you do that? Well, you could start chimping. You could start putting it on ETTL and seeing if the camera can figure out. It may not. It's going to be all over the place. I know how much light my flash puts out because I measured it ahead of time. One easy thing to do, and again, the beauty of this is it's got the Pocket Wizard built in, is I'll set it for Pocket Wizard. And Rick, if you kind of pan over here a little bit so you can see everything that's going on. I've got my flash on manual. It's not on anything automatic. It's just on manual. In fact, let's see what it's set for. It's set on manual on 1/4 power. So let's see what 1/4 power is going to do to this scene. And I'll just take a reading from here with the light. And you see the flash fires. And what did it bring us up to? It brought us up to f8. It's actually more light than we need. I lowered the power on the flash. I turned it down from 1/4 power to 1/8 of a power. Let's see what the reading is now. So now I take my reading, and I'm getting 5, 6. And now the flash contribution, and Jess, you can see it there, 50%. It's 50% now, which is nice. That's a nice contribution of flash to ambient. And really nice result. We got a really nice result. The exposure's really perfect. And the background looks good. Jess is illuminated. Now we can see the background. It's getting dark and light. But 1/3 of a stop of difference for the background isn't going to really make a difference. What we're really concerned about is the lighting on the subject. So what I'm doing is, Jess is going to have her face turned this way a little bit. I want to illuminate more the side of her face that's away from the camera. That's called short lighting, and it is most attractive for most people. All right, so now I'm at 6, 7, which actually might look well because because the background has lightened up a bit. So let me take a look on the background. Again, I'm just going to use the camera to get my background number. And that's nice. We got a nice result now. The light's a little more directional. It's lighting the side of her face away from the camera. So we've got a little bit of shade on this side, a nice exposure for the background, and that worked really well. Okay. So after we're done with this, we will make it a point to go over and murder the guy with the weed whacker. But until that happens, let's get a meter reading. All right, so now I'm at 4.8. I'm going to go to 4.8 on my camera. I've got just now kind of in the shade. Really nice. That really worked well. So let's try one more of those. I'm going to zoom in. And gorgeous. Okay, had a bunch of questions coming through during that last video segment, so let's clear up some things. First of all, a bunch of you asked, does this only work with the Pocket Wizards? Well, the radio trigger inside the back of the unit is designed for Pocket Wizards. If you are using some other way, some other radio trigger, or some other way of triggering your flash, there are other modes on the flash that you can use. There's a corded mode. We actually plug in a sync cable to the sync socket here and go out to your flash. Or there's another mode where this unit will wait 90 seconds for a flash to be fired. So all you need to do is using whatever you're using, whether it be just your on-camera flash or radio poppers or something else like that. In that case, you put it on the waiting mode, fire the reading button, and it will wait 90 seconds to see a flash. So it will work with any flash in that way. Another question was about white balance. So when I'm doing white balance, yes, I'm doing white balance using the flash. The camera is still using the flash. So it's going to figure out the contribution of the flash to the shade and give me a really perfect white balance for that situation. I'm concerned about the color of the subject, not of the distant background. And speaking of the distant background, a few of you asked about how am I metering using the camera for the distant background. Am I using spot metering? And the answer to that is no. The problem with spot metering the background is it's really going to vary a lot depending on where you're pointing the camera. So I put the camera on matrix or evaluative metering. I want to kind of get an average of the scene. Now we discussed this a lot in the first session, and we'll discuss it more in the future. But your camera can capture about 2.5 stops up and about 2 stops down on average from that middle reading. And that's what a meter really gives you. It gives you the center. It gives you that average, and you want to make sure that you're not going to go above or below that. Subject for detail in another day. Also, I was asked about the target that I use. The target that I use everywhere I go is the Color Checker Passport. I love it because it's got everything I need in one small case. It's got a white balance card that I use for white balancing. Even if I'm in the rush where I don't have time to do a custom white balance, I'll just hold the white balance card up and take a shot of it with the light we're using, and then I can white balance in software later because I'm always shooting on RAW. Secondly, it has those color charts, and those color charts are what allow me to create a custom camera profile which will really dial in the colors much better than trying to use any of the generic settings. And if you're interested in that, check one of my online webinars on raw color power. We'll send you an email with those coming up as well. So before I continue, Sarah, any more questions? Okay, so let's keep going. I hope you're starting to see how easy it can be to get great portraits outdoors. As I said, I've seen many folks afraid of using flash. Oh, there was another question. Someone asked, how do I figure out what distance to use the flash, and do I use light modifiers? Two good questions, and the answer to both, well, let's distance first. What I do with my flash, or what I did with my flash, is in a darkened room so that the flash is going to provide all of the light, or most of the light, I set it about 10 feet away, and I start at about 1/8 power, or 1/4 power. I'll then take a reading. Now I happen to know that my flash at 1/4 power, at 100 ISO, at 10 feet away, puts out exactly f8 worth of light. You can do this with any flash. If you have a lower end flash that's got less power, you can just figure that out. You'll see in an upcoming segment where we're going to do some flash adjustments. I generally like to start at about 10 feet away for using a fill flash. That works really well for outside. But by moving it just a little bit, sometimes as little as a foot, you can change the percentage of flash to the ambient by 10% or so, and you're going to see that. So let's take a look at another situation that really needs flash to add dimension to your subject. This time we're going to shoot in full shade, and it has a completely different set of issues. In full shade, it's often easier to get a good exposure because you don't have the real contrasty situation. But the problem is in full shade, the light is so flat that there's no shape or dimension to the subject. And adding a little bit of flash off camera can have an amazing effect. Let's take a look. So as I mentioned before, when we used the camera meter, it got really fooled by this dark background. So I ended up overexposing Jess by a stop and a third. By using the ambient part of the meter, which I'll just switch to, we take our reading, and I'm using dome up because I want to get all the light that's falling on Jess's face, and I'm getting 1/25 at f11 now. Again, it's changing constantly because the sun's coming in and out of the clouds. Our camera meter gave us a very different result. So 125 at f11 we know is the exact result for here. Let's see what the camera gives us. So I'm going to put the camera on shutter priority on 1/25 and let's see what reading it gives us back. This is a reading of 7.1. That's a stop and a third overexposed because again it's factoring in. What's interesting is if I come in closer to Jess, it's going to give me a different number because there'll be less of the background. Let me try that and see what it does. When I came in closer, it gave me f8, so it backed off a little bit, but it's still a stop overexposed compared to what it should be. I really need it to be on f11. So let me put it on f11 and let's see. Now f11 is what we wanted, but it still makes for kind of a flat photo. It's exposed correctly, but there's no light going on. There's no directionality to it. I really need to bring in a flash. So I've got my flash off to the side, and it's really set at 1/32 power on full manual. So I'm going to take a reading, and I get f11 at 40%. 40% contribution of the flash to the ambient. And since it's directional from one side, it's going to add some nice shape. So now, still at f11, except now 40% of the light's coming from the flash. Okay, give me a gentle, not smile. Not mean. Actually, look over, look right here. And that gives me a nice directional shape. This time, Jess, actually look complete in profile. And that comes out really cool. Just for one more time, I'm going to go back to shutter priority since the light's changed a little bit. And you see how bad it really is. Same shot, shutter priority. And it's overexposed, it's flat, it's lifeless. Not Jess, the shot. I'm going to pay for that. You want to hit me now? Okay. That's it for now. All right, so we got a lot more questions. So let's answer some of them. A couple of them were about equipment. Some of you asked about the actual physical system that I'm using for the stand. This piece right here is simply called an umbrella mount. They're about 12, 15 bucks. You can find them in any camera store. They're designed to hold an umbrella. However, I also have a generic little hot shoe adapter that just screws into the top, and that's what the flash is sitting on. I'm using a Pocket Wizard Plus 2 here, and I'm using what's called a Pocket Wizard Caddy, which is really handy because it wraps around pretty much any pole. You can even wrap it around the flash if you wanted. Now, one of the beauties of Pocket Wizard, there's a bunch of you Sony shooters out there. Pocket Wizards are camera agnostic. They don't care what camera you're using. All they're going to do is tell your flash to fire. And when we're on manual, doesn't care what flash you're using. If you're having a Canon or a Nikon or a Sony or a Vivitar or whatever, it's going to work the same way. It's really very simple. Sarah, you had another question.
Are you shooting manual flash power? What about zoom?
Okay. Manual flash power, again, the question was zoom. Yes, I will try to match the zoom to what I'm doing on my lens, but generally I'm going to keep it wide. I'm not going to ever zoom in more than 70% because at 10 feet away, a flash of this size without a diffuser on it is kind of becoming a point light source. So I will kind of keep it at 70 or wider. If you put the diffuser on, you can try that as well, but it's going to cut down your light output a lot if you're out in the sun. It's something you have to experiment with a little bit because everybody's flash is a little different. I happen to have a 580EX2 here. If you're dealing with, maybe you have two different flashes. Maybe you have a 580 and a 430. Maybe you're a Nikon shooter and you have two different flashes. All you need to do is do that test that I mentioned, and that's put your flash in a darkened room or a dimly lit room and take a shot. Put it on quarter power, go 10 feet away, and see what your reading is at 100 ISO. Now, if you guys are familiar with the inverse square rule, that's how flashes work. If we're on a certain power, let's say I'm on 1/4 power, and I move my flash from 10 feet to 20 feet away, what's going to happen is it's going to be 4 times or 1/4 the amount of light actually hitting my subject. So each time you double the distance to the subject, you're having half the amount of light. Now, if you're using multiple flashes and for some reason you want to have them in different positions and matching the same power, if you do that simple test I mentioned, that you know at 10 feet at 1/4 power you're going to put at f8, maybe your second flash is less powerful and you have to be at half power at 10 feet to get that reading. That's just the one part you need to learn about your flash. And at that point, you have the option of either adjusting the power on the flash if you want to bring it up or down a little bit, or simply move it a little closer or a little further, as we're going to see in just a minute. Any other questions?
What are the benefits of pocket wizards over radio poppers?
Okay. The question was, what are the benefits of these pocket wizards over radio poppers? The radio poppers and the new pocket wizard the Flex and Mini use very sophisticated systems to work with ETTL. So they're not generally working in a manual mode. And I do use those. However, the beauty of the Plus 2 is they're simply like a light switch. All they're going to do is tell your flash to fire. There's no confusion of controls. It's not waiting for exposure information to come back. When my camera fires, the information is sent from the Pocket Wizard radio frequency into the receiving unit, and it simply tells the flash to fire. The advantage of that is it's very fast. There's no data traveling back and forth. It's just going to fire the flash. And with the flash on manual, I get the same result every time. And that's what we're after. It's the whole thing about consistency. Anything else, Sarah? Okay, that's it for now. We'll take some more questions in a little bit. Let's try a new environment. Now we're going to move to an urban setting. Now, if you watched part 1 of this series, you'll remember my friend Susan, and she's joining us again this time in New York City. Now, this setting has a cloudless sky. It was a beautiful day, but very bright. So we needed to find some shade to do our portraits. Now, before we go there, there was one other question that's very important. Someone asked, how do you meter for people that have different skin colors? What if you have a light-colored skin next to a dark-colored skin? That's the beauty of incident reading. We're not dealing with reflective readings. When I take a reading from the subject back towards the camera, it's measuring the amount of light falling on the subject. Doesn't care what color the subject is, doesn't care what clothing they're wearing, doesn't care what's going on back there. It's measuring the light falling on them, and it cannot be fooled. If you didn't see our first session, I went into that in a lot of detail. Incident metering eliminates that. You're going to get a correct exposure regardless of the skin tone. So all you're going to do is meter back to the camera from where your subject is. So in this session, I also like to let you know to watch closely the different results as the percentage of flash to ambient light changes. And also, I'll give you a reminder at the very end of today's session, there's going to be about a 50-second little slideshow of a lot of today's results. And in that, there's a quick sequence where you'll see flash contribution to ambient from 70% all the way down to 20% in 10% increments. And you can see the different looks. And from that, you can kind of decide what percentage of flash to ambient is what you are after. So let's take a look at this. So here we are in Washington Square Park in the Village in New York City. It's an absolutely gorgeous day. However, it's really sunny out. There's not a cloud in the sky. So when we're dealing with environmental portraiture here, we're not going to want to be right in direct sunlight. It's going to be way too harsh. Also, the ratio of the light in the shade to the light in the sun is going to be really extreme. So let's actually take a look. So we're shooting at 100 ISO today because it's really sunny. So I get a reading, and in the shade I'm getting 7.1 at 100 ISO at 1/100th of a second. If I just come over here into the sun, it's going to be quite a bit different. I'm I'm getting F14, which is 2 1/3 stops difference. That means there's over 4 times as much light here as in the shade. We're just traveling with one little portable flash. That's going to be way too much of a difference to overcome. So we have to be careful where we position the subject. So we're going to find some nice shade. And what we're going to be after is shade that's kind of on the fringe, in between the sun and the shade, so that we have a little bit extra light. So let's come on over here. So here we are. This is Washington Square Arch. You can take a look up top here. It's a really pretty spot. So we're going to start over in here. So what I'm thinking is we'll start shooting in here, kind of right on the edge where we've got some sun reflecting off of the stones. So it's starting to create a little bit of a natural ratio, but I still need to control it better. So if I take a reading back towards the camera, it's perfect. I'm still at 7.1, yet we've got a little bit of a reflection coming back. That's bringing it up to 8. So it's adding 1/3 of a stop just from the reflection of the sun. So we're going to do some tests in here, and we're going to combine flash with the ambient light to create a little bit more shape. So what we've done is we've got a flash set up over here, and it's set on full manual. Again, we're shooting at 100 ISO because it's a bright day, 100th of a second. And when I take a reading back towards the flash, I'm getting F8, and the contribution of the flash, you can see, it's 40%. So 40% of the light that's illuminating Susan is flash. Now what's interesting is if I take a reading with the camera back towards the street, and you can see the Empire State Building off in the background, I'm getting a reading of F8. Now that's an average. We've got a lot of dark trees there, so that's bringing it down. If I were to take a reading on the sky, it's going to be a lot hotter. But with that average reading of F8 and F8 coming from the flash, what that means is that Susan's illuminated the same as back there, so we're going to have a very even exposure. So F8 at 100th of a second, and let's see what we get. So I'm going to get a little more full length on you, and I'm going to come down here.
Gorgeous.
We've got a lot of great stuff. Now, what I want to do also is I want to calculate the flash contribution based on the distance, and that's one thing that's really important. What you're going to find is if you go much over 50%, it's going to start to look kind of contrasty. It's going to look like you're using a flash, which is kind of what we want to get away from. What we want the flash to do is add a little shape so that we have a little bit of a light ratio where there isn't, because we're in full shade here, so there really is no light ratio on you. You're evenly lit. By adding a little ratio, we can add a little more shape and depth to the subject. But we got to figure that out with the flash. So let's come on over here. Susan, actually, I'm just going to ask you to kind of just stand right here because we're going to do a little test. Now, one thing I recommend you do is when you've got your flash, put it on full manual, bring it into kind of a darkened room. I know that my flash at 10 feet at 1/4 power puts out exactly F8 worth of light. Now, we're in the bright sun, so it's going to see what that contribution is. So I'm going to start out with 1/4 power. I'm about 10 feet away, so let's see what the reading is. So again, I'm pointing back towards the flash, and I'm getting F9, because again, we have a lot of ambient light to go along with it. The flash contribution is 60%, which is kind of strong. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to start high and work our way down, just to illustrate what these different percentages mean. Like 70% is going to be a lot of flash. So let's do that. I'm going to just bring in the flash a little closer and take another reading. And you can see, what do we got? We got
F70.
we got 70% at F11. So this is good. That means that 70% of the light that's illuminating Susan is from the flash, which is going to be kind of harsh. It's a look, but it's not a look I'm going to necessarily like. So F11, and this is a 70% contribution. And you can see it's very harsh. Actually, I'm going to bring this around a little bit. And yes, stay with your head turned that way a little bit, but a little back towards me. Good, right there. That's it.
The wind is blowing.
Yes, it's a windy day. Hey, it saved us having to buy a fan. Okay, so you can see, you'll see it's kind of a harsh, little too much flash, right? So first I'm just going to back it off a foot. And just backing it off that much is going to bring it down. Now remember, you remember the inverse square rule? So if I take the flash and move it twice as far, then that means 1/4 the amount of light is going to actually make it to the subject. So let's see now, just moving it back a foot. And that did it. Just a foot brought us from 70% to 60%. Still strong, still more than I usually like to deal with. But now we're at F9. So let's do a 60%. And a little better. Still casting a bit of a shadow. I want to bring it down a little bit more. I really just want the flash to add some fill light so it's cutting down, or actually adding a ratio rather than cutting down. We want a little bit of light to dark. So I'm going to bring the power down a little bit more. Okay, so now we're at 1/8 power. And once again, I'll take my reading. So we were at 70%, 60%. That brought us to, what do we got? We're now at 40%. So I'm going to bring it a little closer because I want to be able to show you all the way from 70 to 20% in 10% increments. So again, I'll just move a little closer. And there we go. We got exactly 50% flash, 50% ambient. We're at F8 now. So let's get that one nailed down. Getting better, getting actually kind of, you can take a look.
Yeah.
Kind of starting to get a nice, more natural look with less of a shadow cast. And that's starting to look nice. Now, one thing when you're doing flash, Susan, as cute as she is, she has a thin face. And the higher the ratio, the thinner the face ends up looking. If you got a lot of contrast, that makes the face look a little thinner. So since Susan is thin, I'm going to want to actually flatten out the light a little bit. So I want a little bit less of a ratio. So let's bring this back again. Okay, there we go, 40%. Now I'm at 7/1. And you see how beautiful this is? It's exact every time. I don't have to use the camera's meter to try to figure this stuff out. It's giving me the exact amount of light that's falling on Susan. And I take my reading back towards where the camera's going to be, and I've got 7.1. All right, getting a little gentler now. So now we're going to back it off a little bit more. And am I good or what? 30%. 7/1, now we're at 30%. Yeah, now we're getting a look that's working better for Susan. It's got a little bit of light on the one side, a little bit just of the ambient on the other. It's just adding a little bit of shape, and it's doing a nice job. And we'll do 20%, which is going to be barely anything. 20% flash contribution is a little bit, but it'll fill in some shadows if there are any. Back to the flash. And
20%.
20%. Just basically we're going back a foot each time. Again, knowing that at 10 feet, at quarter power, we're at F8, and it's easy to adjust back and forth. So what we did was brought it from quarter to 1/8 power to cut it back, and then just a foot in and out is going to change that percentage. That's good. There we go. And actually, it is kind of nice for you. It does work for you.
Yeah.
So even at 20%, it adds just a little bit of contrast on either side. So by doing this, you can get the look that you want. If you see 20% works for you, but for someone who's got a broader face like moi, I need a real high ratio to just try to counteract my round face. So for me, you would want to have a higher ratio. So you're probably going to want to be at 40 or 50%. Well, hi there. Not at all. We can add her as a model. So once you find that look that you like, again, having the meter gives you that information that there's no other way to get. Your camera can't do this. Only the meter can tell you the percentage of the ambient light versus the flash. All right, you guys sent me so many great questions that I had to have them printed out, and I decided to get a chair to sit here. Just relax, and let's talk about some of the questions that you have. Now, one question was, is this light adequate enough as compared to the studio strobe monolights? Two different worlds, and as I mentioned, the next session we're going to do is going to be with studio strobe monolights, and we'll compare. We'll start with these, and I'll show you the differences. Do you have the control with this as you do with a studio monolight? No. But it's certainly a heck of a lot easier to travel with this than a set of monolights, which are going to need a big battery pack as well. They're kind of different things. You don't have the advantage of the light modifiers on a studio set on a small flash like this. So there's a lot of advantages to studio lights, but we're traveling light. And to answer a few of you asked the same question. Are the images you're seeing, have they been edited? And the answer is no. I did not do any edits to those images. All of the images that you're seeing are exactly what came right out of the camera. Now, if I was going to then take these and print these, yes, I would do some more editing, I would do some smoothing, etc. But I didn't do this because I wanted you guys to see exactly what's coming out of the camera. Oh, somebody asked about the Pocket Wizard Caddy. I can't really zoom in. You can just Google it. It's a little plastic carrier with a strap that the Pocket Wizard sets into it, actually screws into the back of it, and it allows you to then attach it to any light stand or pole. So that was a good question as well. Now, somebody asked a question about white balance and profile shots with the ambient only light versus the flash plus the ambient. Well, since in all of my final shots I was going to be using flash, I was most concerned about the white balance when the flash was adding a contribution. Flash is close to daylight, and the ambient light in the shade is going to be much cooler. So the combination was going to end up somewhere in between, and that's the white balance I would use for my custom. Now, if I was just shooting ambient, then I would do an ambient custom white balance for that, or at least have a reference target so that I could white balance off of. And I'm more concerned about where the subject is. Back there in the sun, it might be a little different, but I want to make sure that my subject is lit correctly. Now, I hope on the last segment, if not, continue to ask the question, that we're getting a little clearer about the percentage of flash to ambient light. There's nothing you have to do to make that happen. When you take a reading with the meter, it tells you in the upper right-hand corner a percentage, and that's the percentage of the flash to the ambient light. And for my starting point, since I know my flash at 1/4 power at 100 ISO at 10 feet away puts f8 of light out, I can go from there. So what I did was I turned it down to a 1/16 power, which is going to be about 2 stops under that. So 2 stops down from f8, 5, 6 to f4. So I'm adding f4 of light to the scene. Now, when I took a meter reading from the scene, if you remember going back, it was 7.1. So if I'm adding f4 to that, it's going to boost it up and get a little bit closer to f8. That's where the meter will give you the information you need. Once I take that reading of the flash combined with the ambient light, it tells me the percentage right in the meter. I don't have to do anything to make that happen. It's just part of the function of this meter. And that's the reason I love this meter. I've had one of these for many years. Another question was about the type of Pocket Wizard I'm using. This happens to be called the +2. They've been around for a while. The reason I like them is they are absolutely bulletproof. If you have some of the newer units, you can use those as well. I'm using, since I'm in full manual, if you have a mini flex combination of the new Pocket Wizards, you can still use them this way. You just need to turn them into what's called the basic triggering mode, which again is a subject for another day. Somebody asked about gelling the flash. When I'm doing environmental work, since the flash is very close to daylight, I don't generally gel the flash. The one time I will gel the flash is in a completely different kind of situation, not environmental portraiture, but when I'm shooting a wedding in a reception hall. If I want to match the foreground color to the background lights a little better, I will put a yellow gel over the flash. But again, I don't have to do any compensation. I'm getting the reading here with the gel or whatever the camera is telling me. This is not going to be fooled. So if I put something over the flash, be it a filter or some kind of light modifier that changes the amount of light coming through, this gives me that information. I just put whatever the numbers are that show up here into my camera on manual, and you get a perfect exposure every time. Okay, let's see. Oh, someone asked, can you get similar settings using the Pocket Wizard with a 7Ds built-in internal flash to use the triggering? I haven't tried that. Sometimes there can be problems with that, particularly out in the daylight. Sometimes the units have trouble seeing the little small pulse that comes out of the on-camera flash. It's something you'd have to try. I don't rely on the camera's pop-up flash to fire my flashes because it is somewhat inconsistent and there's a little bit more of a delay. It may work okay, but you may lose some flash sync speed when that happens. It's something you would have to try for yourself. And for those of you that ask for prices on these things, we will send an email with a link to where you can look that kind of thing up. I believe the 358 meter itself is $309. And check your favorite photo retailer and see what they're selling it for. The wireless trigger module, if you want to add that, is $75. And the Pocket Wizard +2s, do we have a price on those? They're around $160. And again, they're beautiful things. I have 4 of these. I carry them everywhere I go. I also have the newer sets too, that what I use at wedding reception. But for all my manual shooting, I love these because they never fail and the range is phenomenal. The beauty, again, of having the wireless trigger over relying on the on-camera flash to trigger your flashes is I can position my flash behind an object. It can be behind a tree, around the corner of a wall, and it's going to continue to fire. And since the radio trigger in here also is radio and not line of sight, it always works as well. Now, hopefully I answered your questions about the percentages. You don't have to do anything to make that happen. Again, you can just do a test, put your flash. A good starting point is probably quarter power because that gives you leeway up and down. Most flashes will go from full power all the way down to 1/128th power, which would be a very little bit of flash. That depends on the ISO combination that you're using. So what I recommend, you're pros. Do a little test, learn your equipment, and see how much light your flash puts out. Any other questions, Sarah? Okay, that's it for now. Let's continue on. So you're starting to see how the percentage of flash to ambient light has a big effect on the look of the portrait. Take some time to decide what look you like, and it is going to depend on your subject. Somebody with a narrow face is going to need less of a ratio than someone with a wider face. If you have a 358 like this, you can always get back to that exact percentage once you find that look that you like. So let's go back to Greenwich Village. We're going to add some more of the environment into the portraits, and we're going to change the point of view a bit. And the fill flash, what it's going to do this time is it's going to counteract a shadow cast. I had Susan put on a hat. We wanted to fill in some of the area under her eyes. And again, these are the shots that came right out of the camera, no retouching. So take a look. So what we're doing now, I love this arch. I want to get a little bit of it in the background, which means I'm going to have to get on the ground to do this shoot. Also asked Susan to put on a hat. So what's that going to do? It's going to shade underneath her eyes, and it's probably going to make them a little too dark. So what we've done is we've got a flash over here. And with the flash, I'm adding 30% contribution into Susan's face to fill in the shadow caused by the brim. I've got a good exposure here. This is what I'm after. I've got the arch in the background, a bright blue sky. The sky might be a little hot, but that's okay because this is the focus, right? Okay. So I took my reading. I'm got 125th of a second at f8, and again, we're shooting at 100 ISO. Flash is adding 30%. Meter told us that. It's going to be perfect exposure every time. I don't have to worry about the exposure or the light on Susan. I just can shoot and ask her to do, or let her do what she wants to do. So let's give it a shot. So we got great results every time. The exposure is perfect each time because we got metered it. Flash is on manual, no variations there. It's always putting out the exact same thing, and that's what you're after. All right, so you've seen a little supplemental flash lightens the shadow under the brim of the hat. And we're going to go back to full shade in a moment. I want to show you what the flash can do also if you're going to be planning on converting your images to black and white. But a couple more questions first. Somebody asked about when I'm using the camera meter to measure the background, what is the setting on the camera, what kind of metering? I'm staying away from spot metering. There are times for spot metering that I do for landscape photography, but not for this. The background is secondary to the subject, so I'm going to use matrix or evaluative metering. I want an average of the entire scene, and that's what I have this on. Now, another question was, do I use diffusers over front of the flash? I do have a portable umbrella-like light box. It's a soft box, basically. It's about 2 foot by 3 foot that I do use a lot for this flash if you want to have a softer shadow. Understand, though, if you're going to use a soft box, you've got to be very close to the subject for it to be really, say, a soft box and soften. And when I'm shooting in an environment where there's more of the background, it isn't really practical. We'll see this more when we do the studio lighting session coming up. I'll show you softbox usage, and I'm going to show you some uses you might not have thought of. We're going to have the soft boxes practically this close to the subject sometimes to get some really cool results. We'll talk about that more next time. Another question.
What mode do you have the camera on? Shutter priority?
What mode is the camera on? Good question. My camera stays most of its life on full manual because this is giving me the numbers. It tells me my shutter speed and my aperture because it can't be fooled. When I take that reading, it gives me, and the reading is the flash reading. Ambient light will just give me an ambient reading, which is fine if that's all you're using. But since we're combining flash, when I take the meter reading, it tells me my numbers, it tells me my aperture and my shutter speed, and it also tells me the percentage of flash contribution. I then just take whatever those numbers are on here. Let's say it's 125 at f8 and I'm at 100 ISO. I simply dial that in on manual, f8, 125th of a second, and the beauty is you get a perfect exposure every time. If you guys aren't used to manual photography, the problem with these things is they've gotten so sophisticated, a lot of us have forgotten some of the basics of photography. We rely on the ETTL, we rely on the metering, and there's so many times that the meter gets fooled. If you guys want professional results all the time, I'm going to recommend really get off of that full program or even the priority modes. If you're using a meter, it gives you the perfect number every time. Yes, there are times I will go into one of the more automated modes. If you're shooting sort of sports, something changing very quickly, constantly, where the light's changing all the time, yes, the cameras are pretty good. But if you want a perfect result, rely on the meter and take the numbers that it gives you, put them in the camera, and it's going to be perfect every time. Anything else, Sarah? Okay, that's it for now. So I mentioned we're going to go into full shade again. This is a real quick clip. I just want you to see that we can also apply everything we're doing if your images are going to end up in black and white. So let's see that. All right, so we're going to do something a little bit different. Before we got started is I had Susan step right over to this spot because we've got the flash off the path here. I want to add a little bit of flash into her side. What we figured it out was 30% about, which is good for Susan. And we're in the shade now, but I wanted to keep my depth of field low. So now we're shooting at 4.5 because I want to blur the background a little bit. So you can see here I've got the flash over here. And make sure it's on. That always helps. And I'm going to ask Susan to start walking towards me, and as she gets in the area of the flash, I can just start shooting. And again, it's going to be constant. The f-stop's not going to change. And Susan, just like we discussed, come on right at me. Eyes towards me. Nice. Gorgeous. Nice short depth of field. So since there's a lot going on behind us, there's people in the park, and lots of trees. It's a gorgeous day, isn't it? Having a shallow depth of field kind of blurred all that. And when you're doing an environmental portrait, sometimes if it's a single subject, you want to do that. You want to blur the background. If the environment is really important to the subject, like it's a place you grew up and you love, then you probably want to have a little bit more of it in focus. But when the focus is on just the subject and just the fact that we're out in the park, then the narrower depth of field works really well. And again, my flash is on manual. 30% contribution, beautiful results. Just adding a little bit of shape since, again, we're in full shade. Oh, we're live. Okay, we're back live. I was told I had to shut up. You believe that? I'm the one talking to you guys, and she tells me to shut up. That's Jen over there, if you haven't met her before. She's the one running this whole thing. Okay, a couple good questions came up. Well, someone asked if I have a 758, how come I'm not using that over the 358? Yes, I do have both of them. It actually comes down, in that case, to size. The 358 fits in my hand really nicely. The 758 is a great meter. And in fact, in the last session, when I do landscape photography, I am going to use the 758 because the 758 also has a 1-degree spot meter built into it, which is going to allow us to calculate our HDR exposures. For regular environmental portraiture, though, I don't have need for that. It is a little bit bigger and bulkier. I like the way the 358 fits in my hand. I'm fortunate to have 3 different meters, and I use them depending on the shooting. Again, somebody asked about gels, if I'm using colored gels. Again, for environmental portraiture, I don't generally use them. I will white balance to the subject and my color is correct from there. I only use a gel again if I'm in, say, a wedding reception, doing an event, and I want to match this flash color a little bit better to the wall lights, then I'll gel it. But other than that, we're talking about environmental portraiture today, I don't do that. Now, calibrating your meter to your camera. Now, I don't want to get too techy today. In fact, for you guys that are really into this, I'm going to direct you to Sekonic.com, where there's lots of information on how to do that. Some of you mentioned the 758. Yes, I do have a 758 as well. The 758 actually allows you to calibrate your camera's sensor directly to the meter. So I did do that. I know exactly how my camera responds because your cameras can be off a little bit. You can be up or down as much as a half a stop from reality, so you can calibrate to your meter. There is a procedure on Sekonic.com about calibrating your meter and your camera. I'll just send you to Sekonic for that. When we do the landscape seminar in September, I will go over actually calibrating your camera's sensor directly to the meter. It's a little more advanced and a subject for another day. Anything else, Sarah? Okay, that's it for now. So, right after this shoot, we went and we had lunch at a really nice kind of open-air restaurant. And I noticed that as Susan sat at the open-air table, there was another opportunity for some nice portraits. And the light was somewhat dim, so I went to a 1600 ISO, and it became immediately obvious that some extra light was needed. And I had my little handy system here, so check out the difference. This first image here, you can see, yes, the light's nice, the exposure's fine, but I knew by adding some light it was going to add a lot more drama. Take a look at this. This is a light off to the back slightly with about a 50% contribution. Look at the shape it adds to the frame. One more going back again, ambient light. Yes, the exposure's fine. There is some reflected light. There is a little bit of shape to the face, but nothing like when you add a light. Again, simply, full manual, 50% contribution, and look at the shape we get. It's an amazing difference. Now, our last lighting situation is going to be some great afternoon light coming through trees. Now, as I mentioned before, dappled sunlight is virtually impossible to overcome without blocking the light actually falling on the subject. Now, there's one exception to that. If the light is coming from behind and adding a backlight, you can take advantage of that to add shape and beauty to the subject. Let's take a look. So it's a lovely summer evening here in my backyard in Western Orange County, New York. It's a beautiful day. It's a little humid. I'm sweating a little bit. I probably shouldn't be using a dark blue shirt. But this is the spot we're going to use to do some photography. I'm going to have Jess come over in here. What's interesting about this is we've got a beautiful sunlit lower yard there. The sun just streaming through. Yet I'm in shadow. I don't want to have Jess in the harsh sunlight. I want to get her in something softer. So I'm going to put her in a chair here in this soft shadow area. And then I'm going to use a flash from this side to illuminate back. And we're going to calculate what we need with the handheld meter. I'm going to use the Sekonic L358 again. It's going to handle all that for us. It's going to give us our ambient reading, our combination with the flash, and allow us to match what we see back there. But a beautiful summer day. Okay, you guys have met Buford before. He's out of his mind for some reason tonight. I don't know what's going on. That and everybody in the neighborhood has decided it's time to mow their lawn or blow leaves. But I just wanted to show you what we're doing here because we got really interesting light. Now, it's kind of harsh coming through the trees, but it's creating some nice effects down on the ground. However, I've got Jess here sitting in the chair, and she's really backlit nicely, but we need to get some light on her face. I'm getting 125th of a second at f8. Now, we're at 800 ISO now because Jess is in the shadow, and I need her to be have a little bit of depth of field. The part I'm concerned about is the part back to the camera, which is going to be here, and I'm getting 3.2. So I need to add some light to this side of her face to bring that up a bit. Now, over here I've got my flash. It's set at 8th power, and I'm going to go ahead and measure that. And I'm getting f8, so I'm actually getting a match to what we're seeing back there. So I'll set the camera at f8 at 125th of a second, and let's see what we get. All right, so what I did was I took a couple of shots. One with the flash f8 contribution onto her face, f8 back there. Then I turned the flash off and shot just the ambient, which made it very dark, and then another one with the camera's meter, which ended up overexposing because it has this dark area here and back there. Again, the meter lets us figure that out. All right, it's getting a little darker back there. I'm going to take another meter reading through the camera. Let's see what it tells us. Now we're somewhere between 7.1 and 6.3. So what I just did is I adjusted the power of the flash over there to give me 6.3 combination on Jess, and at that it's giving us also 50% mix of flash to ambient, which is going to be nice. So let's go ahead, put our camera on 6.3 and see what we get. Nice. We've got the dog going out of his mind, dog barking in the background. I'm now sweating like a pig, but the great news is that the results were great. We got really striking images, as you'll soon see. Okay, we're live. Okay, another lot of great set of questions. Now, there's a lot more questions than we're ever going to be able to answer in one session. I will give you guys an email address. Actually, when we do a follow-up, everyone that joined us today will send you an email. I'll give you an email address that you can answer me questions because some of you have something that's really specific. I'd be happy to help, but we can't spend all day here, unfortunately. But a couple quick questions. Some of you asked about the effect of ISO on the images. I generally try to shoot most of the time at 100 ISO because that's going to be the cleanest. 400 I'll also do if it gets dimmer. I did mention in those portraits in the restaurant I had to go up to 1600. If you look at those files very closely, if you would actually look at the file, you'll see that in the shadow areas, it's starting to get a little bit noisy. As wonderful as these new cameras are, once you get the ISO above a certain point, you're going to have some degradation. Particularly in the shadows, it's going to get a little noisy. So when possible, don't do it. What was the other question, Sarah?
Rapidly changing lights.
Okay. Some of you asked about rapidly changing lighting situations. Again, I'm concerned about the subject. Now, where it becomes a problem is if there's more than a stop difference between my subject and the background. Then I'm going to have to do something to adjust the light. But if the light's moving around a little bit, the sun's going in from cloud to shade, and we're having a 1/3 to 2/3 of a stop change, I'm not going to worry about it. If it gets above that, then I'm going to have to remeter. Oh, some of you also asked about focusing as I had Susan walking towards me. Two ways to do this. In many situations, I do like to manual focus. In that situation, I let the camera's focusing handle it. It was a fairly small gap that she was actually walking because I was some distance from her. I was using a 70 to 200 lens for that. So the distance to her was great enough that I had a fairly wide focus range. The other thing I will do, however, and I do this in weddings all the time as the couple's coming up the aisle, is I will stay on manual focus and I pre-focus to a spot. And I'll just, with my other eye, watch to see when they reach that spot on the floor, as I just did with Susan walking through the path. And when I see her get close with my other eye, I'll just start shooting, and that makes sure that I have focus that is nailed every time. Anything else, Sarah? Okay. I know you guys have more questions, and I want to get them answered. So when we do our follow-up email, I will give you an email address that you can use, and we'll explore it some more. Also, we're going to cover a lot more territory in the next two sessions when we do studio lighting and landscape. But for now, I hope that you're seeing some of the possibilities that using your off-camera flash on its manual setting can add to your portrait photography. It's really very easy to do. Just having a few tools, as we discussed, a light stand, an umbrella mount, a set of radio triggers, and of course, a light meter that can control everything and give you the information you need, and you'll get consistent and beautiful results every time. Now again, remember this session is being recorded. It'll be available shortly to watch, and we'll send everyone an email with a link to the recording if you'd like to review it or share it with someone else. I hope you've seen the information that a meter brings you will provide you with the much more consistent results, and that's what separates out a professional from an amateur. Getting the results you're after with accuracy and consistency makes for a true professional. So if you're tired of missing shots, if you're doing a lot of guessing, if you're constantly chimping at the camera to see if it looks good, get yourself a meter. And a light meter like the Sekonic 358 added to your photography toolkit will take you a long way. Now, as I mentioned, we've got 2 more sessions coming. Session 3 is on August 30th at 1 p.m. We'll be live in the studio. We'll focus on studio lighting to create portraits using 1, 2, and 3 lights. And as I mentioned, you'll be amazed what you can get with just 1 light and my favorite light shaping tool for portraits, a big softbox. So join us then if you're interested in that type of portrait photography. Then next, on September 21st at 1 p.m., I'll talk about controlling and evaluating light for landscape photography, which is a real true passion of mine. I'll discuss composition, storytelling, and show you how to measure light in each scene to get the best exposure. We'll even talk about combining our meters and the zone system a little bit. I'll also explore when it's time to move into HDR photography, using multiple exposures to get all the tonal range in the scene to really create the image you really want. Take some time to try out some of the techniques that I've discussed today. I know you're going to be pleased with the results. It will take you to a completely different place. As I mentioned, there are times when I do use the TTL radio systems for shooting, primarily at events like wedding receptions, and stay tuned, I will be doing a program on that as well. But the control you have with manual flash and your light meter is really hard to beat. As I mentioned, we're going to end with a quick show of some of the results from the shots that we've seen earlier. Also, as I mentioned, there's a quick sequence during this show where you'll see the flash contribution from 70 down to 20% in 10% increments. So it really show you how the light ratio changes with the different contribution of flash and how you can evaluate what's going to work best for your subject and your client. So, thanks for joining us. Until next time, have a great week and hope to see you online again soon.